Humans are hardwired to avoid the kind of chaos seen in this burning village. Yet the central challenge of leadership is guiding a group through these exact moments without the unit fracturing under pressure. Military training solves this through engineered suffering. These recruits, locked together in the surf, are experiencing a deliberate escalation of hardship, starting in boot camp and intensifying through special forces selection. When you are freezing and exhausted, your survival stops being an individual effort. You realize that if the person next to you fails, you fail. That realization transforms a group of strangers into a unit. This shared trauma is the mechanism that builds absolute trust. You rely on them because you've already proven you can't make it without them. In the Soviet experience of World War II, the objective was survival at any cost. This is the logic of total war, a state where military personnel and civilians alike are treated as fuel for the front lines to ensure the nation continues to exist. Soviet strategy relied on the brutal reality of numbers, as these soldiers manning this weapon represent. The plan was to slow the Nazi advance by throwing more bodies at the problem than the enemy had bullets. For those on the Eastern Front, the margin for error was non-existent. As these prisoners show, the only options were to die fighting or die in a camp. This visualization maps the millions of lives traded to stall the invasion. In attrition warfare, whoever possesses the greater volume of men and material eventually wins, provided they accept the cost. The gap in this timeline represents a generation of lost potential. But Lex Friedman notes it also created a unique cultural gravity. This loss shaped the melancholic, Nietzsche-like, and Stoic literature of the era, fostering a national psychology that prioritizes deep human connection over the transactional thinking of a modern career. Surviving an existential threat on this scale requires total submission to reality. When the stakes are this high, individual ego is the first thing that must be discarded. The principles that allowed nations to survive the 1940s are the same ones that dictate the success or failure of a modern organization. In both environments, the primary internal threat is the leader's own ego. Early in the war, Hitler's generals executed highly effective blitzkrieg maneuvers. Those rapid successes fueled a lethal overconfidence in his own intuition. That ego led him to eventually ignore his advisors and open a second front in Russia. Because he believed he was beyond error, his unacknowledged mistakes compounded until they destroyed his entire military. Joseph Stalin demonstrated a different failure of ownership. His early rigid refusal to see the trajectories the war could take meant he was consistently behind the curve, failing to protect his population from the initial Nazi march. When a leader prioritizes their own narrative over objective truth, they lose the ability to make sound decisions. They stop leading the team and start leading them into disaster. A great leader doesn't just dominate a room. They build an organizational machine that thrives even in their absence. Elon Musk attempts to set a standard of accountability by sleeping on the factory floor, diving into minute engineering details to solve production emergencies. However, if an organization of this scale requires the CEO's presence to solve every fire, it hasn't truly scaled. A leader stuck in the weeds cannot look up and out at the competition or the market. Steve Jobs' dictatorial style worked because his design intuition was exceptional, but it also created a bottleneck. When a team operates out of fear of the boss's temper, they stop taking the creative risks necessary for the company to survive without that one central visionary. The solution to these ego-driven bottlenecks is decentralized command. By training subordinates to own 80% of the decision-making, the leader is freed to focus on the horizon, while the team executes out of a shared sense of mission rather than waiting for a decree from the top. Leadership isn't begin with a team. It begins at the micro level, with the individual's battle against their own comfort. The 4:30 a.m. alarm is a tool for seizing an immediate victory over your own mind. When you get out of bed while it's still dark, you are choosing a small voluntary hardship over the easy path of sleeping in. Getting the most painful tasks of the day done before the rest of the world wakes up establishes an uncompromising psychological baseline. It reminds you that you are in control of your actions. Choosing these solitary constraints is a form of training. It inoculates your mind against the involuntary chaos that life will eventually force upon you. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu serves as a physical laboratory for these concepts. On this mat, there is no way to simulate competence. You are either technically proficient or you are being controlled. A chokehold provides immediate, undeniable feedback. It doesn't care about your ego or your job title. If your technique is wrong, the mat will prove it to you within seconds. This forced humility is the connective tissue of leadership. If you can learn to admit defeat on a mat, you can learn the humility required to listen to your team in a boardroom and admit when your plan isn't working. Whether you are leading a nation, a corporation, or just yourself, success depends on one thing. You must, first, submit to the truth and own everything.